Views and opinions expressed within the following program are solely those of the individual. These views and opinions do not necessarily represent those of Shaw TV.
Hey Calgary, I'm Kevin Chorney, and this is Calgary Now.
Home ownership. It's a rite of passage for most Canadian adults, a sign that you're responsible enough to save money for a down payment and you're ready to pay a mortgage, a life goal that many of us strive for. Yet, for a lot of us, it's becoming an unattainable one, with housing prices in major cities like Calgary rising faster than inflation and salaries. Along with cost, there's also uncertainty. With mortgage debt being a significant burden, along with other debts and savings to consider as an adult, home ownership may not be the sure thing it once was. So, what's a young adult to do? Buckle down and buy whatever you can afford, rent, or save for a little bit longer and hope for the best.
The average adult makes around 35,000 decisions daily. Granted, most of them are relatively insignificant, although one would hope we'd be well equipped to make some of the tougher decisions when it comes to one of the biggest events of our lives, buying a home. It might sound easy in principle, but the task can be a difficult one. You wait and buy with the hope that prices will drop and risk rising interest rates, save up in order to lay down a substantial down payment. Can you really afford it? Are you sure that you want that spare room for when your mother-in-law visits? Obviously, a lot goes into buying your first home. My guests and I are all set to discuss this in just a moment. Get at us on Twitter at Calgary Now Show if you're into it. But first up, let's check in with the rant pack.
I think homeownership in Calgary is varying. It depends on what your priorities are and what your situation is. If you can scrounge up the money and you figure you're going to be in Calgary for the next 40 years, then absolutely go ahead and buy a home. If you think you like to travel more and have vacations and buy Nikes and buy Tiffany jewelry, then don't buy a home. Rent. Have somebody else fix your problems for you. But you have to think about what your retirement plans are going to be in the future.
Hey Calgary, thanks for joining us tonight. We are pleased to have Ken Chapman from Gencor Mortgage, Suzanne Lavallee from Longley Condominium Services, and of course, Yannick Harrison from CIR Realty. Guys, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
We'll start with you, Ken. Tell me a bit about what you do with Gencor.
Yeah, I'm the general manager. It's one of Canada's premier mortgage companies. We've been in business since 1987, funded over $11 billion in mortgages. So when it comes to mortgages and working with clients, whether you're a first-time home buyer or refinancing, we're the guys to call because we'll be able to walk you through step by step to make your purchase carefree and easy.
It's a fair pitch. It's probably a true pitch. I appreciate it. You sound like you're definitely a busy joint over there, so thanks for taking the time for being here today. Okay. Suzanne, how about yourself?
I'm the owner of Longley Condominium Services. I started the company in 2001, and we provide management services to both condominium owners and primarily work with boards of directors of condos.
Okay. Well, I own a condo, so I've got a few questions for you. We'll get to
good.
that in a few minutes here.
Good.
How about yourself, Yannick?
My name is Yannick Harrison. I'm a real estate agent with CIR Realty. I do most of my business around Calgary and Airdrie. So in a nutshell, I help people with their transactions, whether it's buying or selling. So.
Are you a busy guy these days?
Very busy.
It's indicative of the market, I suppose.
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right, guys, let's get right to it then. I first bought my place in 2010, and my monthly mortgage turned out to be about on par what I'd been paying for rent at the time. Is that still the case? Can you still get into a home for what you'd be paying rent, or have those good days gone?
Well, you've seen, that's a great question. You've seen with migration coming into Calgary, and you see a very tight housing market right now. It's put pressure on the rental market, so there's very little, and you can speak to this, places that you can rent. And what people that have rental properties, when it comes up for renewal or they're going to lease to someone new, there's a big command in the market. We hear clients that put their place up for rent, they throw it on Kijiji, and they get 200 calls and emails for people bidding to be able to go.
Vacancy rates below 1%. Sure, it's going to make sense.
It's a real problem in the Calgary market for sure.
And actually, depending on the area of town you're in, it may sound funny, but it may actually be cheaper to buy than renting because there's some of the condos and townhouses that you're going to pay a good chunk of money. And if you actually look, if you're going to buy with at least 10% down, odds are your payments are actually going to be less than what it would cost you to rent.
Now, with that said, is there any market conditions when renting would be the better option? Probably depends on vacancy rates.
I don't know. So, well, obviously, there's depending on market conditions. I personally believe that when it comes down to when is good for you to rent, it comes down to your situation. If you're coming to Calgary, you're going to work here maybe for a year and you're not sure where you're going to end up next, renting is great. If you're going to be in Calgary, you rent for a year, you like the place, and you know you're not moving out for at least 5 years, then I would say your situation is changing and renting is maybe not so much necessarily the best option.
I mean, it's been tough with the flood as well. Obviously, it's had an effect on not only the rental market, but of course, who's deciding to buy homes, no?
Huge.
You know, when we sit with clients, we like to look at their cash flow. And yes, there's maximums that you can qualify for, and we like to do a little education around that. If you're going to own a home, do you want to be able to save for that RSP? Do you want to be able to go to that movie? Or in you're talking to the gentleman that was speaking earlier, you want to buy the jewelry or go on trips. It's about having a budget.
You know, and it's tough. I think about first-time home buyers, primarily going to be younger people. Just going to throw some numbers out here, bear with me. The average home price in Calgary, house I should say, $445,000, which at 5% down equates to about $22,000. Now with closing costs, depending on it, I'm sure they can be negotiated, that's ballpark at $15K. So we're getting close to the $40,000 mark for first-time home buyer. Coupled with the fact that mortgage repayment terms, of course, have dropped from first 35, then down to 30, and now we see 25-year repayment terms in place. I mean, we're not exactly catering to the younger first-time home buyer these days, are we?
Well, first-time home buyer definitely would be, you definitely would have to save up a little more. But it comes down to perspective. If you're from Toronto or if you're from Vancouver, you look at the house prices there and the affordability. In Vancouver, the average person income, there's 70% of that serves housing.
That's house board. Is that not house board?
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
If you look at Calgary, we're still well around the 35% mark. So when you look at the numbers, is that not affordable? It really depends which way you look at it. If you compare to other city, it is very affordable. But is it tough for two young people to kind of pull money together and buy a house? It maybe is not as easy as it used to a couple of years ago, but it's still
the key number: two people. Two people.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a lot of young people come in and sign mortgages?
We are seeing a lot of people in the Calgary market. It's different depending where you are in the country, of course. But in Calgary, we've got one of the highest income levels per household.
Right.
We see in our business the average income being around $100,000. So from a savings ability and price point for them to be able to buy, it's not uncommon for a first-time home buyer to be in the $500,000 range for a purchase price with 5% or 10%. But you touched on a good point on that 35-year amortization. Then it went to 30, and now it's at 25 for the high ratio, so that's less than 20%. It was always like that before, and then in the early 2000s, they wanted to expand the market, and they created the 35 all the way up to 40-year amortization, and the government wanted to make sure that people are getting into their homes, should be homeowners, so they made these reductions. Has that reduced the market? Absolutely, and it caused a backlog for people that thought they would be able to afford a home. Could not. They've been pulled out and they're still renting today.
I think I would argue that there's a lot of people that are in that exact position today. Are these rules, these laws, I mean, is this a disservice to our real estate market?
that one is really kind of a political item. They wanted to really cool things down in certain part of the country, and because it's a national body, it kind of trickles down to everyone. Because they're really worried mostly about the Toronto and the Vancouver market. If you look at those two markets alone, they have more than 50% of the real estate market in Canada. So when you hear of the average price in Canada, that's mostly they're talking about Vancouver and
which is going to skew national, right? Yeah.
But then you look at Calgary. Well, if you look when we kind of had the slump in the way back, well, you hear like, oh, this is overpriced, and then you get Calgary who's just chugging along, like we're just getting the price increase and people moving in and the jobs creation. So for them it was mostly like try to cool things down, but for us, like I found most people I've been working with, like they have the money to buy and they're buying, so
it definitely slowed our business down. We saw a drop by about 12% with regards to it is significant. What's interesting, the people that do have the 35-year amortizations today, or 30. It's interesting, they're saving their money to RSPs.